Hey everyone, Zach and Pamela from Performance Plus Programming, and today we're going to talk about the 5 most common squat mistakes we see athletes making that's hurting your performance. Okay, so the first squat mistake that we typically see with athletes is that they don't think about keeping their upper back stiff when they perform the squat. So what you'll notice is as Pamela walks into the rack to perform a back squat, she's almost thinking of doing like a face pull where she's pulling herself underneath the bar. She's squeezing those shoulder blades together. She's pulling her elbows down towards her side. That's going to create a lot of upper back stiffness that will then also translate to the low back staying locked into a better position. Mistake number 2 that we see in individuals when they squat is that they're not squatting in the best stance for themselves. So far too often it's still said that every athlete should squat with a shoulder width stance and toes directly forward. And what you'll notice with Pamela is that like when she does that, even though she has great mobility, her depth isn't that awesome because it's just not where her hip sockets are optimally suited to squat from. So what more athletes should do is play around with different stances. So she went a little bit wider, a little bit more toed out, and you're gonna notice just a lot more ease in dropping into the bottom position of your squat. So don't be scared of testing out different widths for your stance and different angles of toe out to find your optimal positioning. Mistake number 3 that we see individuals do when they're squatting heavy weights is that they don't know how to properly brace their spine. So they often do 2 things when they're doing it wrong. Number 1, they do this giant chest breath where you see Pamela's entire spine kind of open up as she breathes in. The second thing you'll often see is people that just put a weightlifting belt on and they just tighten it as much as possible without understanding what a good brace looks like. A good brace should look a little bit more like this. I like to imagine that have my hands wrapped completely around an athlete's stomach, and they're gonna think of breathing into my hands, expanding their belly, and then after they expand their belly, they then tighten their abs on top of that. That belly breath plus tight abs almost like carbonates. It increases the pressure inside of your abdominal cavity. So think of this as like grabbing a Coca-Cola can versus a water bottle. That carbonation makes that Coca-Cola can stiffer. If you have a stiffer spine, by bracing properly, you're gonna be better able to translate force from your legs through your spine into the barbell. Squat mistake number 4 that we see is that individuals often overemphasize the sit back cue when they squat. Now don't get me wrong, the sit back cue is not always wrong, but if that's your only thing that you're thinking of when you initiate the squat, we'll see a lot of athletes that turn it way too much into a hinge movement and then they bend their knees, when really we want to see those knees and hips bend at the exact same time. Now that degree of knee and hip bend is going to vary a little bit based on the sport you're in. If you're a CrossFit athlete or an Olympic weightlifter, you're going to be really even between hips going back and knees going forward. If you're a powerlifter, low bar squatting, they're still going to break together, but you might see a little bit more hip hinge as you go down, but we definitely don't want to see this initiated with only the hinge component of it. So we want to see knees and hips break at the same time. And then finally, mistake number 5 that we see is what we call the good morning squat fall. So that's where an athlete, as they come out of the hole, you're going to see their hips either shoot back or shoot up first. It'll look like that. Notice how as Pamela squats down, that torso angle stays relatively upright, but then it drastically changes on the way up. And so it's called a good morning squat fault because the good morning is an exercise where we do a hip hinge pattern. It looks like this. We do that to strengthen our low back, our glutes, our hamstrings. If somebody does a good morning squat, so let's go down to the bottom of your squat again. Look at the bar, then Pamela shoots her hips up and back. The bar doesn't move, and then she stands up. So if the bar doesn't move, we know distance. Work equals force times distance in physics. So we've done no work on the barbell. And what we've done is we've just moved the quads out of the way of the bar to then turn it into a posterior chain exercise. So we'll see that good morning squat fault in people that are relatively weak in their quads compared to their posterior chain. They're trying to move that load to the muscles that are a little bit stronger to avoid those that are weaker. This is one of those faults that won't show up until you get to a heavy weight or you get to a lot of fatigue. But if you see that, you want to start working on quad strength. It will typically not be as obvious as Pamela is demonstrating right here. It'll typically be pretty subtle, but it's good to see it when it's really drastic like that, so to help you better identify it if you're doing that. All right, so there are our 5 most common squat mistakes that we see athletes make. Make sure you're keeping your upper back stiff. Play around with different stance widths to find what suits your body the best. Learn how to properly brace your spine. Don't overemphasize the sit back cue. And finally, don't have the good morning squat fault. If you do, work on building up those quads.